Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Maria Garcia. Glad you're with us this Sunday evening. Tonight we're tackling one of the most partisan and divisive topics in Texas politics, the voter ID law. There is virtually no bipartisan on this subject. Republicans say making everyone show a state-issued ID at the polls prevents voter fraud. Democrats say it disproportionately affects minorities and poor voters who sometimes can't get an ID. This week, a federal judge stopped the tough law, saying it's discriminatory and unconstitutional. The ruling is a defeat for Republican-backed photo ID measures that have swept across the U.S. Most have been upheld in court, but the Supreme Court last week blocked Wisconsin from implementing its voter ID law. Our guests tonight include Bob Pena, El Paso's Republican Party elections administrator, and Glenn Butch Maya, the chairman of El Paso's Democratic Party. We want you to be part of the discussion. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC7Extra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by phone at 915-496-1775. On Twitter, you can tweet with the hashtag ABC7Extra or tweet me at MariaGABC7. And joining us now, Bob Pena and Glenn Butch Maya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So we have a lot to talk about, but first I want to start with the opinion from the federal judge, Judge Gonzalez Ramos, a very scathing opinion. So we have one of her quotes that she said in the opinion, and I want to read it to you if we can get that up on the screen. Basically, she said that the voter ID law creates an unconstitutional burden on the right to vote, has an impermissible discriminatory effect against Hispanics and African Americans, and was imposed with an unconstitutional discriminatory purpose. Bob, strong words. How do you respond to those comments by the judge?
I'm insulted. I have no reason to think that Hispanics in Texas are any less capable of providing a voter ID than any of the other 23 states. I would think any of us would be, do we have less common sense than the rest of the Texans, than the rest of the citizens of the United States? I think it was very condescending of her to think that, oh, I can do it because I'm wearing this black dress, but none of the other Hispanics, they don't have the ability to get a free voter ID card. They don't have the common sense. I thought it was an insulting and condescending statement for her to make.
Now we're going to get to the issue of the free voter ID card in a bit. The Justice Department saying it would affect about 600,000 people in the state of Texas. What do you think about that? Mostly black or Hispanic?
I've heard that figure, and I have to question it because I know, for example, there have been people who are registered to vote. How many of those people that are registered to vote perhaps are not citizens? You know, anybody can register to vote. You just have to fill out the form. You don't show your ID, you don't show your citizenship or anything. You just fill out that paper. However, when you go to vote is when you have to show that you are a form of identification. So I question that figure very much. I don't know where it comes from. I mean, Texans don't seem to have any trouble, cashing a refund check or getting around with our IDs. We've made so much effort. Do you know that when the state of Texas provided a free identification card to people who couldn't afford to have one, the average in the whole state of Texas was 1 per county. Not even, actually. There's 257 counties, whatever it is, and only 254 cards were provided in the whole state of Texas. It's a non-issue.
Okay, Butch, I want to ask you, for people who say, hey, it's not an incredibly burdensome process to get an ID. If you are lacking the documentation you need to get a photo ID, say a birth certificate or other identifying documentation, you can pay $20, maybe up to $40 to get that, and then you get your free Texas ID. What do you say to people who say, it's not hard to get an ID?
You can't say it's not hard, number one. Number one, it is. You have to show proof that you were born in the United States, or you have to show proof that you're a citizen of the state of Texas or the United States. So you have to have a birth certificate, for example. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, my grandfather, they were born in Shafter, Texas. There's no way that they're going to find that birth certificate to prove that. So you're putting a burden on the elderly right now that they have to show this ID. Yeah, you can come, well, they can vote early, they don't need an ID, they don't need this, they don't need that. But to get that voter ID card, they have to go to the clerk's office and buy and pay for a birth certificate. To me, that's a poll tax. And a lot of people are looking at it that, and that's what this ruling is that they're charging for you to get that voter ID card. And that's the first thing that I disagree with. Bobby's saying that Texans aren't smart enough. No, they are smart enough. They're smart enough to know that they have to go do something to get something that is constitutionally their right to do, which is to vote.
Now, what about the argument that says this law had been in place since 2012 without any major incidents?
Describe to me what you call major incidences.
Well, Republicans say we put the law into effect and it went smoothly.
Did it? You have to work the polling locations to know if it went smoothly. There was many provisional ballots being given out. Elections Administrator Javier Chacon can answer this. How many provisional ballots were given out because someone didn't have an ID? They were in the book, they were in the system, they got found, but they didn't have that proper ID. And a Texas driver's license in my books is, why are they using just that? Why can't they use an issue from the city? A bus pass issued by the city, that's a government agency. Something else can be used as proof that who they are. The bottom line is, who are you?
May I answer that?
Yes.
I will show you how difficult it was, and these can be found in the minutes of the last meeting of the El Paso Elections Commission. What Butch referenced was how many people were, quote, disenfranchised or turned away. In the municipal election, there were 40,000 votes cast. There were people who presented themselves to vote who did not have the proper ID and were forced to cast a provisional ballot. There were 3 out of the 40,000. There were 3 people who, when you go in to cast a vote, you get to cast your vote, but it's not counted. You have to cast a provisional ballot. When they do that, their ballot is sealed and they have a week to go into the courthouse and say, here's my ID. The county gives them a map of how to give there. They get a free parking pass. The county does everything but send a taxi to pick them up and take them to the courthouse to show their ID. 2 of those people did not go to present their ID. The 3rd person did go and present his ID. Unfortunately, he was a Border Patrol agent from Tucson.
How do you respond to that, Butch? The fact that there are resources to help people get their ID?
My main fight on this is that why should you? Do you have an ID? I have to ask you, do you have an ID? Yes, you drive. You have a Texas driver's license. Why do you need that to go vote, which constitutionally every American has that right to vote? Why should I have to prove that I live in the state of Texas? We know who you are. We see you every night. We see you in the newscasts as many times as we do. We know who you are. So why should you have to produce an ID to prove who you are? That's the key.
Okay, now the argument is to prevent voter fraud, and I want to talk about that. In the last 10 years preceding the voter ID law, there were 2 convictions for in-person voter fraud in Texas. Some people say there's just not enough evidence that this is a rampant problem. 2 convictions in 10 years of in-person voter fraud.
Right.
Well, 2 is 2, but we don't know how many are really getting away because we have no way of checking. We have no.
But we live in a system where we build policy on facts, not on speculation. So does 2 convictions merit this law? Do you think?
This law isn't only just about that particular part of proving who you are. One of the benefits of this law that is as a result of this identification is saying, where do you live? When you come in, you get a voter registration card, you go in and you vote. Now you're going to present a voter ID, your driver's license. What has happened is that you're presenting something that says where you live. A problem exists very seriously in that people are not voting where they are supposed to. Maybe you used to live in Fabens, but now you live in Socorro or El Paso. You have no business voting for the Fabens mayor, the Fabens school district, the Fabens water, whatever, Fabens thing, if you belong there. We have one case here in El Paso where there was a house with 23 voters in it. those 23 voters, 23 voter registration cards going to one house, those people didn't live there. They lived in other places. They should be voting in another person's justice of the peace court. They should be voting in another person's commissioner's court. They might not even be in the city of El Paso. They might be somewhere else.
When was this, the 23 voters in one house?
This was discovered in 2012. The city of El Paso removed that. Oh, by the way, that was in the home of an election judge who had the 23 voters. And that election judge, the city of El Paso removed. I think you can remember that. But see, these are other benefits that come from presenting a voter registration card. I mean, a voter ID to see where people live, so that people are voting where they should be voting.
But you know, even if there isn't a whole lot of documentation of voter fraud, what is the harm in adding another layer of protection in the election process?
You're asking people to go do something for what constitutionally they have a right to do, vote. And that's what we're fighting here. It's not the Democratic Party against the Republican Party. It's both parties saying that, like you mentioned, we had two convictions of fraud.
But if voting is so important, and it is,
Right.
shouldn't we strive to keep the process with as much integrity as possible? And what do you respond to the argument by Republicans who say this is what this is doing, is adding another layer of protection?
Is it? What protection are you having? You have to go show a valid voter ID card or a Texas driver's license, or let's even go further, a concealed handgun license, a military ID, a birth certificate, a residency card, the big one. We're not talking the little one, we're talking the big one that INS gives. They're asking for more and more and more and more and more to prove that you have a right to vote, that I have a right to vote. And that's what we're arguing, is that why should we have to prove to a total stranger, a clerk, a judge, an alternate judge, it doesn't matter what partisanship they are, that I'm who I am? Very few cases have been proven wrong. Bobby brought up this judge who had 23 people living in her house. Well, we do live in the communities, in poor communities, and some of these people have to live someplace. They have to. I didn't see any big problem with that.
Bobby, you were going to say something?
Yes, obviously the 23 people were not living, adults were not living in that one house. And there was obvious fraud in that. And so that can be common sense. But what I was going to say is, we don't take this cavalier. It's not just presented to everybody. My God, this is the right to vote. I don't want anybody, one person, to cancel somebody else's vote. Are we going to go back to what we had before? Before, anybody could go, and I can go into Butch's house, because we're friends, and pick up his water bill, go to on Monday, when the early voting is going, under the old system, and I would say, my name's Butch Maya. Do you have any identification? Yes, here's my water bill. The water bill says Butch Maya. I get to vote for Butch Maya. No questions asked. Because the old form says you could vote with a water bill. And what chaos is going to happen if this is upheld, if this is not
But that was the status quo before, and there's arguments that there wasn't chaos. But we're going to talk about this a little bit more. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court's ruling in Wisconsin. We're going to talk about that when we come back. So stay with us. We still have a lot to discuss. Remember, you can join the discussion. You can call us at 915-496-1775. Email us at ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com, or tweet me at MariaGABC7, or with the hashtag ABC7Xtra. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Here we go. Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. We have a few emails that I want to get to. This is from Belem. She says, voter ID is not voter suppression. Voter ID is voter verification. And then we have another email with a different opinion, and she shares an experience she has. She says, I want my 18-year-old boys to vote for the first time, spent at least 3 hours at the DPS office and $16 each, a ton of paperwork, social security card, birth certificate, a utility bill, and a signed affidavit from me to get them an ID. I know the voter ID is free of charge, but tell me the average Joe would take the time off work and try to meet the 8 to 7 p.m. hours to vote. Is If that is not voter suppression, then what is? Voter fraud argument is a fraud. Thanks, and this is from Chewy, actually. That's Chewy saying that. So he's, saying he spent 3 hours at the DPS office trying to get an ID, a ton of hassle. What do you say to that, Bob?
For the right to vote, his 3 hours for the rest of his life? There are people who die around this world for the right to vote. You're going to need he wouldn't be complaining about the 3 hours if he spent so he can go and cash his paycheck. I question where his need for order in life is if 3 hours for an identification seems much.
Oh, but what about, and I know this is the quintessential example of somebody who people say is disenfranchised, but really, I mean, truly, what about the single mom who's working 2 jobs and who just doesn't have the time to go spend 3 hours at the DPS office because it affects her livelihood?
If she's working, she's already got some ID. So I don't see that as being a problem. She's got to have some ID that is acceptable.
No, I'll disagree with that, because you're asking people to go to DPS. We've all been to DPS. Bobby's been there, I've been there, you've been here. It takes at least 3 to 4 hours to go in with your documentation and your proof. Now these are this guy Chewy who wrote your email. He's basically saying it the way we're saying it. Why should I have to step out of my norm to go get a card issued by DPS? And yeah, he had to pay for it. You have to pay for it. This is a poll tax. You're charging people to show their proof that they're allowed to vote. And we haven't had anything statewide majorly to cause this in the millions. We're talking the millions of dollars. We're not talking just $3.
We're less than 2 weeks away from the midterm elections. Some Republicans argue that this ruling by a judge who's been appointed by President Obama is in some way political wrangling, and that it's meant to affect the elections, or at least disrupt them coming up. And so that this matter really should be settled until after the elections. That a week and a half before the elections is just not the appropriate time to settle this. What do you think about that?
You have to do it when you have to do it, bottom line. And right now, it's not a week and a half. We've been going on this for over a year and 6 or 7 months now, that we've been arguing this over and over and over. The judge ruled, that's the law of the land, we go with it. Why not 2 weeks or 1 week or 3 weeks or 6 weeks or a year before the election? The election is something totally different than what we're talking about here. Because you're saying,
but I mean, it's not like it's a completely different subject. I mean, clearly we're talking about the right to vote, which affects elections.
right. That's the bottom line.
This is the handbook that's given to the judges. 25,000 of these were prepared a year ago. They have the law. You're going to, in a week, rewrite this book. You're going to retrain 20,000 election workers. Butch and I are concerned with the 750 that we have working on election day. We have 100 that start working in a week at the early voting sites. What is the law? Today it's this, tomorrow it's that. We've got these people trained. The programs are already done.
Now, some would argue, though, that there was no voter ID before 2012, and that was the status quo before then, and people managed it just fine.
And it worked.
There was a voter ID. However, the voter ID was as little as an envelope from, and do we want to go back to that? I respect our vote more than that. And we're going to have chaos because we have judges and clerks who have been trained to accept this. How are they going to know what to do, what to train? You're going to have retraining for thousands and thousands of people?
No, we're only talking 165 polling locations.
We're talking about El Paso. And across the state of Texas, there's 20,000 of us, Butch, election officials.
Okay, we want to go to our phone lines. Willie from the east side is calling. Willie, hi, what's your comment or your question?
Well, basically, you need an ID to vote, because you need an ID to purchase alcohol, cigarettes, open a bank account, apply for food stamps, apply for Medicaid, unemployment, either drive or buy a car, to even get on a plane. So it's a necessity. It's not a racist thing. It's a necessity thing.
Willie, thank you for your comment. Willie's saying, hey, you need an ID to purchase alcohol, get on a plane, get food stamps. People say, again, having an ID, carrying it in your wallet, it is a reality of life.
I carry mine. Honestly, the last 5 general elections, I've always used my ID. I very seldom use my voter registration card. But I have an ID because I go get my driver's license. To the regular old Joe that lives on 6th Street in Paso or somewhere down there, that they're new. We've registered over 10,000 new voters for this election. 10,000. We're not talking 100, we're not talking 50, we're talking 10,000 new registered voters. And we're going after the minorities. We're going after the women, the men, black, brown, yellow, whatever you want to call it. We're going after them because those people are not being represented.
Okay.
But those people who were registered, they didn't have to show any form of identification.
No.
To register, you just fill out the form. You don't show a driver's license. You
No.
don't show any identification. So don't you think it's appropriate now that we should say, okay, we have this paper that says that you got this thing mailed to you at this address, but how do I know that you are Joe Blow? Can you show me some identification? It is so sacred, this right that we have to vote. Let us give it the same importance that we give to cashing that $1 refund check that comes in the mail from your Post Toasties or whatever.
Okay. We have to take another commercial break. When we come back, we have another phone call, and we still have a lot to talk about, so stay with us. Again, the number to call, 915-496-1775. Email ABC7Xtra@KVIA.com or Twitter @MariaGABC7. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We have another email. This is, doesn't say their name, but he says, I believe you should show an ID to vote. I have had to help my elderly in-laws get IDs with no problem at all. My daughter moved away 20 years ago and my son 11 years ago, and I still get voter cards for them after notifying the elections authorities repeatedly. What if someone else were to use this information to fraudulently vote? Oh, I'm sorry, and this is Dennis in East Central. Bob, I want to ask you, the Supreme Court last week also basically told Wisconsin that they can't use their voter ID law anymore, which is not as strict as Texas's law. Wisconsin's ID still allowed college IDs. So even if the state of Texas makes it past this appeal, if it goes eventually to the Supreme Court, I mean, we have indications that the Supreme Court will probably not support the law anyway. So what is the end game here?
I disagree with your statement that the Supreme Court will not. The Supreme Court has upheld it for 23 states already. Why the Justice Department chose to take on Texas and Wisconsin are for strictly political reasons. The reason the Supreme Court did abstain, I understand now, did vote that way was because not 9 members of the Supreme Court ruled. I understand now that there were only 6 members of the Supreme Court that ruled.
They all ruled, but 3 dissented.
They dissented.
They dissented.
They did
but
not
like
cast the vote.
But in every decision, there's not in every decision, but in a lot of decisions, there's dissension among the court because you have conservatives and you have those who aren't conservative. So
well, I can't answer that because they didn't give a reason from what I understand.
Right.
I honestly do not know the reason why. I know that there are others who have more strict rules than ours and some that have much looser rules of voter ID. But I mean, it's something that has 23 states are doing fine. Why was only Texas picked on? That's what I find so frustrating, disappointing.
It's all about money.
what do you mean?
To me, it's all about money. State of Texas is huge. We both know that. It's a huge state. It's a very disenfranchised voting number state. And in other words, the Latinos, the blacks, everyone else, women, don't vote. So they're looking at it as saying, well, where are we going to make some money? To me, it is. It's disenfranchised.
Okay, I want to make sure we get to some of our callers. Randy on the east side is on the phone. Hi, Randy. What's your comment or your question?
Now, this is Randy from the east side, and I'm just curious whether Mr. Meyer, Mr. Pena knows out of the estimated number of illegal aliens that are in this country, whatever that number is, if there's any trend line, if there's any statistics, any data at all that shows any kind of estimation, whether or not any or how many, if they are, of those illegals may be voting in any election at any level. And I think that's a pertinent question. Thank you for answering it if you can.
Thank you very much, Randy. So, do you all know any data about illegal immigrants voting in elections?
I don't know of any, and I don't think it would be high. I'm sure there is a much larger number that are registered voters who were registered because when Acorn went and knocked on their door, said, you want to vote? They didn't want to say, I'm not here legally, so they'd fill out the form, sent them in. But I don't think they're going to vote. I think that is why we have so many people that are on the rolls, just like your friend who tweeted you and contacted you earlier, whose people have been out of town. They don't have Texas IDs because they haven't lived here for 10 or 20 years, just like many of the illegals who are on the rolls because they're not really seeking to vote. I don't think it's a problem that big.
Honestly, there's very little problem with illegals. The illegals go through the system. We registered 10,000 in El Paso.
What protections are there so that citizens or those who can legally vote and not those who can't?
The system that Javier Chacon has here, our elections administrator for El Paso County, checks every single voter registration card that's turned in, number one.
Against what?
Against if they have a citizenship, if they're an American, are they a Texan, are they...
How does he check that?
He checks it through the DMZ, the voter register. It's there. You're there.
But your driver's license does not say whether you're a citizen or not. It just
But when you go get a driver's license in the form, they ask if you're a citizen.
Yes.
But once you get your driver's license, that's all your driver's license doesn't say whether you're a citizen or not.
Okay. Let's get to another caller. Jari on the east side is calling us. Hi, Jari. What's your comment or your question?
Yes, my name is Cherie Halford from the east side. And every student in every school in this city and state, they have to have a photo ID. I'm sure every adult can also present a photo ID to vote.
Thank you very much, Shari. So Shari's saying students have it, thus adults can produce it.
Not every student has a driver's license. It's issued by the Texas Department of Public Safety. That's the key. The key is that they're strictly using driver's license. Well, if you don't drive, you're not going to get a driver's license.
Well, state-issued IDs, which
it
can
has to be
include
anything from the state or the federal government.
Right.
And so it can be any state or federal. Like
No.
it goes so far as to give the people who have the Texas right to the gun shooting certificate. That is
Concealed
allowed
handgun license.
because it comes from a state or a federal government. It is a governmental entity that has given that. It's not, you know, people used to be able to vote by showing their Sam's Club card. That's one of the things that's allowed.
Because they were asking for a photo ID.
Yeah, it's, in other words, any photo ID. This puts some teeth into it. Because people can make up photo IDs. We used to make them at Pappy's Photo in El Paso when I was 18 and wanting to buy beer. Now, I would buy the beer for him. But you know, now there is some strength in that because we value it so much. It's so important. You don't want anybody to cancel your vote. I don't want a single vote canceled by someone else.
Well, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it on that note that you used to buy beer for each other. Maybe probably still do. Politics aside, thank you again for joining us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And thanks again for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you'll join us next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.